When did you realize your parents had a favorite child? I was the oldest of two, me and my younger brother, Casimir. The favoritism wasn't the loud kind, it was the quiet kind, the kind that's almost invisible until one specific moment makes the whole pattern snap into focus. My moment was at my father's hospital bedside, when he was dying, when he thought I was Casimir. My father was heavily medicated, slipping in and out. He grabbed my hand, his eyes half focused, and he said, "Casimir, my boy, I have to tell you before I go about what we did, about the girl." I didn't correct him, because something in his voice told me not to. I squeezed his hand and said softly, "Tell me, Dad." And my dying father, thinking I was my brother, told me a story. He told me the girl wasn't an accident, that he and Casimir had handled it together, that your mother never needs to know what we did with the car, that you were only 19, I couldn't let it ruin your life, you had so much ahead of you. Then he drifted back under, and I sat there holding the hand of a man who, even half dead, was still protecting Casimir, the way he always had. But this time the favoritism wasn't about who got the bigger slice of cake. This time it was about a girl, and a car, and something they'd done, and something they'd hidden from my mother and from me for years. The favoritism, I realized, wasn't my parents loving Casimir more. It was my parents covering for Casimir, over and over. Every time something broke, every time a girl stopped coming around, or a friend suddenly cut Casimir off, my parents smoothed it over, paid it down, made it disappear. I wasn't the easy child because I was loved less. I was the easy child because I was the one who never needed covering for. I was the alibi-shaped daughter, the respectable one they could point to. My father died 2 days later. He never said another lucid word. I didn't tell anyone what he told me. I investigated instead. The girl, the car, 19. Casimir had been 19 14 years ago. I pulled local news from that year, and I found her. A 19-year-old named Marigold, killed in a hit and run, 14 years ago. Same town, never solved. Her family was still asking, every year on the anniversary in the local paper, for anyone with information to come forward. I had a brother who'd killed a girl with a car, a father who'd helped him bury it, and a mother who'd been lied to for 14 years, and a dead man's confession that wouldn't hold up in any court given to the wrong child by mistake. I spent 3 months gathering what a confession alone couldn't prove. The body shop records, the insurance claim my father filed that year for deer damage, the car, which Casimir, unbelievably, was still keeping in storage like a man who couldn't let go of the thing that defined him. I brought all of it to Marigold's family, and then to the police. Casimir was arrested. My mother learned in her 60s what her husband and her favorite child had done while she made their dinners. But here's the thing. The detective taking my statement was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she told me this changed another case too. That there had been a second girl, 2 years after Marigold. Same method, same town, never solved. And that on the night of the second girl, Casimir had an ironclad alibi. He'd been with me. I was his alibi. The easy daughter. The respectable one. The one they could always point to. Full story on channel, link below. I walked out of that police station and I couldn't feel my legs. I was moving, I know I was moving, but it was like my body was on autopilot and my brain was somewhere else completely. I got to my car and just sat there. I didn't start the engine, I didn't touch my phone. I just sat with my hands on the wheel and started replaying that night. The night of the second girl. Because I remembered it. I remembered it so clearly it made me sick. Casimir had shown up at my apartment with no warning, no text, no call, nothing. He just knocked around 11 at night, and when I opened the door, he looked like he'd been crying. Me and Dad got into it. "Can I crash here tonight? I just don't want to go home." And I said yes. Of course I said yes, because Casimir never came to me. Not ever. Not without our parents setting it up, not without some holiday forcing us into the same room. But that night he came to me on his own. We sat on my couch and put on some dumb movie, and he fell asleep before it was halfway through. I pulled a blanket over him and thought, this is nice. This is what having a brother is supposed to feel like. He picked me. For once in my life, he actually picked me. And now, sitting in that parking lot, I wanted to throw up. Because maybe he hadn't picked me at all. Maybe I'd just been convenient. The next morning I called Tony, the detective. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone twice. When she picked up, I didn't even say hello. "I need to know about the second case. Everything you can tell me." She was careful with what she said. The second victim was also a young woman. Also a hit and run. Also late at night on a road with no witnesses. Also never solved. The same type of damage pattern on the vehicle. The original investigators noted the similarities but couldn't connect them. Tony said, "Your brother had an alibi. You." That word just hung there. You. Like an accusation and a fact at the same time. I asked her straight out, "Are you saying my brother killed 2 people?" She paused. "I'm saying we have one confirmed case and one open case with matching details. What I need from you is to think very carefully about that night. What time he arrived. What time you actually saw him. Whether there are any gaps. Because I'd never thought about it before. Not once in 14 years. But now I started doing the math and my whole body went cold. Casimir had texted me that evening, around 7. Something like, "Coming over. Me and Dad had a big fight. Need to get out of here. 7 o'clock. But he didn't show up at my door until almost 11. 4 hours. I'd never questioned it. I figured he drove around to cool off. Maybe stop to eat. I didn't ask because I was just so happy he was coming to see me. I was so busy feeling chosen that I didn't stop to wonder where he'd been for 4 hours. I told Tony all of it. The text at 7, the arrival at 11, the gap I never thought to question. She went quiet, the kind of quiet that tells you someone is writing something down. Then she said, "That's a 4-hour window." And I felt like the floor was tilting because I wasn't just Casimir's alibi. I was his perfect alibi. Perfect because I loved him too much to ask a single question. Perfect because I was so desperate for my brother to choose me that I didn't care where he'd been. Perfect because I was the easy daughter. The one who just said yes and pulled a blanket over him and thought it meant something. After I hung up, I drove to my mother's house. Teresa. I didn't call ahead. When I got there, the front door was unlocked, which told me something because my mother always locked that door. Always. I walked in and found her at the kitchen table. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. Her eyes were red but dry, like she'd run out of tears days ago. The first thing she said was, "Please tell me you're here to say it's over." And I wanted to say that, but I couldn't. I sat down across from her and said, "There might be a second girl, Mom." Her face didn't crumble. That's what I expected. But it didn't. It just went completely still, like a mask. And then she said something that stopped me cold. "Your father told me there wouldn't be." I just sat there, staring at her, because those words meant my mother had known there was a reason to ask. Those words meant my father had given her an answer. At some point my mother had looked at my father and asked if their son had done it again, and my father had said no, and my mother had chosen to believe him. And I realized sitting at that kitchen table that every single person in my family had a role. My father was the fixer. Casimir was the problem. My mother was the one who didn't ask questions. And me, I was the alibi, the easy one. We'd all been playing our parts for 14 years. house. And somewhere out there, two families had been waiting for answers that whole time while we played house. I leaned forward. What do you mean Dad told you there wouldn't be? Wouldn't be what, Mom? What exactly did you ask him? Teresa's hands were shaking, really shaking. She looked down at the table and started talking in this low, broken voice. She said she didn't know everything. She kept saying that, like it was a shield, but she knew something. Years ago, after Casimir's behavior got worse, after another round of strange, late-night phone calls between him and our father, she had finally worked up the nerve to confront him. She'd stood in their bedroom and asked him point blank, "Is Casimir in trouble again?" And my father, the man who controlled every single thing in our family, had looked at her and said, "I handled it. It won't happen again. I made sure of it." And Teresa had chosen to believe him. She hadn't asked what it was. She told me she hadn't wanted to know. She said she could feel the shape of something bad underneath his words, but she couldn't bring herself to dig it up. Part of me understood that. The tired part of me knew what it was like to love someone enough to not ask the question you're scared of. But the bigger part of me, the part that had spent 3 months pulling apart my father's lies, was furious. You knew something was wrong and you just let Dad handle it like you always did? You just let him say, "I handled it," and you went back to making dinner? Her head snapped up, and for the first time in maybe my whole life, my mother fought back. "And what would you have had me do? Your father controlled everything. The money, the decisions. I raised you both and I cleaned up after both of them, and I kept this family together while your father played God with everyone's lives." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She was looking at me like she was daring me to judge her, and I did. "You kept a family together that was built on a dead girl's body." She flinched. Her whole body pulled back like I'd hit her. I thought she was going to tell me to get out. I thought she was going to choose Casimir again, the way she always had, but she didn't. Instead, she pushed her chair back, walked to the kitchen counter, and opened the deep drawer at the bottom that we were never allowed to touch as kids. She pulled out a folder, old, the edges soft and bent, the kind that's been sitting in the same spot for years. She slid it across the table. Her hands were still shaking. "Your father kept records of everything, insurance papers, repair receipts, phone logs. I found these after he died. I didn't understand them, but something told me to keep them." I opened the folder, and there it was, my father's handwriting, small and neat, dates, amounts paid to a body shop, and I saw it immediately. 2 separate entries, 2 separate years, 2 separate sets of deer damage claims. The first matched the year Marigold died. The second was 2 years later. Same body shop, same type of repairs, same cover story. My father hadn't just helped Casimir once. He'd had a system. He'd had a plan for when it happened again, like it was a thing that needed maintenance. Patch it, file the claim, move on. I'd come to my mother's house expecting a fight, expecting her to defend Casimir the way she always did. Instead, Teresa, in her own broken and complicit way, had just handed me the thing that could connect my brother to the second girl. She'd kept it for years, without fully understanding why, and now she was giving it to me. She was standing by the counter, arms wrapped around herself, smaller than I'd ever seen her, and she said quietly, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to finish this, because I couldn't." I drove straight to the police station. I put the folder on the table in front of Tony and said, "This is from my father's files." My mother kept them. She went through the whole thing twice. She slowed down on certain pages, flipped back to compare dates. Then she looked up. "This is enough to reopen the second case formally." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, but then she held up her hand. "I need you to understand something. If this goes forward, your brother's defense attorney is going to put you on the stand, and the first thing they're going to ask is why you were his alibi and why you waited 14 years to come forward." The room felt very small, and I heard my own voice, steady, when I said, "Because I didn't know." Tony looked at me a long time, then she nodded, slow. "Then we need to make sure that's absolutely, provably true." And I understood. Casimir's lawyer would try to turn me into a liar, into a woman who knew exactly what her brother did and only came forward when it was convenient. The easy daughter was going to have to prove she'd been easy because she was innocent, not because she was in on it. And I was ready, because for the first time in my life, being the one nobody told anything to was going to work in my favor. 3 days later, Casimir called me. I was at home with copies of the folder spread out in front of me when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to, and his voice was on the other end, calm, almost gentle. "Hey sis, I heard you visited Mom." I didn't ask how he knew. "I just want to talk to my sister, that's all. Can you come see me?" Tony told me it was a bad idea, that Casimir was looking for information, not connection, but I went anyway. I needed to look him in the eye. I drove to the jail the next morning. When they brought him in, I almost didn't recognize him. Thinner, not in a healthy way, his face drawn, but his eyes were the same. That same look that made people trust him, that made our parents believe every word out of his mouth. He sat down, and we just looked at each other. Then he said, "I know you think I'm a monster." And I looked at this man who was my little brother, who I used to share cereal with on Saturday mornings, who I once carried on my back through a parking lot because he stepped on glass at the beach. And I said, "Are you?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he started talking about our father. He told me what happened the night Marigold died, how he'd been driving home from a party, how he'd been drinking, more than he should have, how he'd hit something on the road and hadn't stopped, how he'd pulled over a mile later and seen the dent in the cracked windshield and known what he'd done. He said he'd been sitting on the side of the road about to call the police when headlights pulled up behind him. Our father, Octavius. Casimir said he didn't even know how Dad found him, but Octavius had walked up, looked at the damage, looked at him, and said, "No, you're my son. I'm not letting this take your life." His voice got thick. His eyes got wet. I was 19. I was drunk. I was scared, and Dad made it go away. And then I had to live with that every single day. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt something pull in my chest because he sounded like a person in pain. He sounded like the brother I remembered, the one who used to be scared of thunderstorms. But I hadn't come for that, so I asked the question I came to ask. "What about the second girl?" And his face changed, like watching a door close. His eyes went flat, dead. "I don't know what you're talking about." Just like that, I held his gaze. 2 years later, same method, same town. You showed up at my apartment that night. You used me as your alibi. He didn't flinch. He leaned forward, very quiet. So quiet I had to lean in. "Be very careful, sis, because if you start saying I did something I didn't do, that's a problem for both of us. You were there. You know I was with you." And there it was, the threat wrapped in a calm voice. He was telling me my alibi, the one I gave without knowing I was giving it, could be turned into a weapon against me. I didn't back down. "You got to my place at 11. Where were you before that?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me. The sad little brother was gone. What was sitting across from me was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had learned a long time ago how to make problems go away just like our father taught him. Then he smiled, just barely, and said, "You should talk to Dad about that." "Oh wait, you can't." I stood up. I didn't say another word. I walked out and didn't stop moving until I was outside in the parking lot. My hands were was shaking so bad I could barely get my car key out. I called Tony and told her everything. When I finished, she said, "He's trying to rattle you. That's what people do when the walls are closing in." Then she said, "But I need to tell you something. We pulled the storage unit records for the car. It's been cleaned, professionally, recently. Someone wiped it down within the last 6 months." I felt the blood leave my face. 6 months. My father had died 8 months ago, which meant that somewhere between our father dying and Casimir getting arrested, someone had the car professionally cleaned, and Casimir had been out on bail for parts of this. He'd had access. He'd had time. He'd been destroying evidence while I was carefully collecting it. "We're running what we can," Tony said, "but this means he knew this was coming." I thought about those 3 months I spent building a case piece by piece, feeling like I was finally doing the right thing. And while I was doing all of that, my brother had been doing his own work, cleaning up, covering tracks. He wasn't panicking. He was planning, just like our father had planned. I said to Tony, "He's not the scared 19-year-old anymore, is he?" And Tony said, "No, he's not." 2 weeks went by, 14 days of not sleeping and checking my phone every 10 minutes. And then Tony called. I picked up on the first ring. The forensic team found something in the storage unit. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The car had been cleaned, but not perfectly. There were traces in the undercarriage, in the spots a professional cleaning wouldn't think to reach. Paint transfer. And the paint matched the bicycle the second victim had been riding the night she died. "We have enough to charge him on the second case." I sat down on my kitchen floor because my legs just gave out, and what I felt wasn't what I expected. It was relief and nausea at the same time. 2 girls. My brother killed 2 girls. Casimir was formally charged with the second death. His attorney argued the evidence was circumstantial, that the car was in a shared family storage unit, that anyone could have driven it. But the insurance records from my father, the ones Teresa pulled from that drawer, told a different story. A second deer damage claim filed 2 years after the first, the dates matching the second victim's death within a 48-hour window. The pattern was right there in my father's neat handwriting. Undeniable. A few days later, my phone rang and it was Teresa. I could tell she'd been crying. "Casimir called me. He said, 'You're the reason this family is destroyed.' He said you should have left your father's words alone." I closed my eyes. I braced myself. I waited for her to agree with him, to choose him one more time the way she always had. But instead, Teresa said, "I told him that his father's words were the first honest thing that came out of this family in 14 years, and that the family was destroyed the night he got behind that wheel." I almost dropped the phone, because that was the first time in my entire life that my mother had chosen me. Not Casimir, not the comfortable lie. Me. Casimir took a plea deal on both counts to avoid trial. The prosecutor told me Marigold's family and the second victim's family would both give impact statements at sentencing. I asked if I could give one too. He said yes. So I stood up in that courtroom on the day of sentencing. I didn't look at Casimir. I couldn't. I looked at Marigold's family in the front row, a mother and a father who had been waiting 14 years for someone to say their daughter's name in a room where it mattered. And I said, I was the easy daughter, the one who never caused trouble. And I spent my whole life thinking that meant I wasn't enough. But being the easy child just meant I was the one nobody had to lie for. And when my father, on his deathbed, finally told the truth, he told it to me by accident. He thought I was Casimir. Even dying, he was still choosing Casimir. But this time, his choice gave me the truth, and I'm giving it to you. Then I turned to Marigold's mother. "I'm sorry it took so long." She didn't smile, but she nodded, and she mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." They led Casimir out of the courtroom, and he didn't look back. Not at me, not at Teresa. And I waited to feel something big, triumph, closure. But what I felt was just this big, hollow quiet, like standing in a house after everyone has moved out and all that's left is the echo of your own breathing. After the sentencing, I drove to Teresa's house, and she was sitting on the front porch waiting. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Then she said, "I kept those papers because some part of me always knew, and I hated myself for not looking sooner." I sat down next to her and said, "You gave them to me when it mattered." She reached over and took my hand. It was the first time in my life that my mother's grip felt like it was actually holding on to me, not reaching past me for someone else. A week later, Tony called and told me Marigold's family had set up a small memorial bench at the park where she used to walk. They wanted me to see it. I drove there alone. The bench had Marigold's name and the years she lived, 19 years. I sat on it for a long time. I thought about how I'd spent my whole life being invisible in my own family, and how the one time my father finally saw me, he saw someone else. But what he said, meant for the wrong child, became the thing that gave 2 families the truth. I got up, I drove home, I didn't look back.